Today I'm out in Michigan taking a look at the all-new 5th generation Jeep Grand Cherokee, and there is a big change for the Grand Cherokee this year. We're getting a 3-row model, the Grand Cherokee L, that's right next to me. Now a little bit later this year we're going to get the 2-row Grand Cherokee, so if you want to know what that's like, watch this video because it's going to be essentially this, only shorter without the 3rd row. If you want to split hairs, I suppose you could say that the Grand Cherokee L is not the first 3-row Grand Cherokee. I suppose technically that would be the Jeep Commander. It was a 3-row version of a previous generation Grand Cherokee. And the 3-row version of the Grand Cherokee 2-row that you can buy today is technically the Dodge Durango. But this is the first time we've had Grand Cherokee labeled on a vehicle with a 3rd row. Right next to me I have the Jeep Grand Cherokee Overland. This one right next to me is a different trim, so you can see we have a different bumper design. As you'd expect, the Grand Cherokee L is instantly recognizable as a Jeep, but it also has a bit of a modern flair. It's not quite as angry as the 2021 Dodge Durango looks, which is no longer related at all to the Jeep standing right next to me. This is an entirely new generation. We have full LED headlights up front and LED fog lights below. As we see in other Jeep models, the front end design changes based on the trim that you get. These are the 2 top end trims. This is the Summit. It's the most expensive version you can get, but it's not the most off-road oriented. That would be the Overland over here, which is why we find tow hooks right in the front. The Summit is designed to be more of the luxury-oriented Grand Cherokee L. So we get slightly wider LED fog lights down here, still LED fog lights in the Overland, but they're smaller and they're on the side. The 7-slot grille is pretty much the same in both models, but we get a different treatment to the middle. This is sort of a honeycomb finish, and this has these interesting geometric elements inserted. The other thing you'll notice is that the Summit trim gets these very large aero treatments right here under the bumper. That obviously is going to compromise your approach angle, and that's why we don't find them over here in the Overland, but it probably has a bit of an effect on real-world fuel economy. Spoiler alert, I can't tell you how this drives on-road or off-road until the 17th of June, so be sure and come back for that portion of the review. In this review, I'm going to tell you what it looks like inside, what it looks like outside, what's going on under the hood, and all the pricing details. At 204.9 inches long, the Grand Cherokee L is almost the same size on the outside as a Chevy Traverse, about 10 inches longer than a Toyota Highlander. But the Traverse and Highlander are very direct competitors for the Grand Cherokee L. Also, I suppose you could compare this to something like the Toyota Sequoia. This is going to be a lot less expensive than a base Sequoia, but if you want a V8, it's actually going to be a little bit more. You might be wondering, why is the Grand Cherokee L so big? Well, it was designed to have V8 engines under the hood, and you can see how long this hood really is. And obviously that's a little bit less space efficient on the outside. So the big difference between this and a Honda Pilot or a Ford Explorer or a Toyota Highlander is that this was designed for bigger engines. And you'll notice we have a much shorter hood in some of those other vehicles. But it definitely gives the Grand Cherokee L a presence that we don't find in most of the competition. This, the Durango, and the Ford Explorer are the only rear-wheel drive 3-row crossovers in this segment. I know some people dislike calling the Grand Cherokee and Grand Cherokee L a crossover. Some people prefer the SUV title, but honestly, that's a distinction without a difference. And in my mind, these are the only true crossovers available in the United States, because the crossover term's origin was a vehicle that blends truck-like features and truck-like capability with a more practical car-like ride. And that is exactly what we find here. And to be perfectly honest, the Pilot and the Highlander, they're really just all-wheel drive minivans that are styled to look something like this. They don't have 2-speed transfer cases. They don't have locking differentials, etc. All of that you'll find on the Grand Cherokee. But versus the average body-on-frame vehicle like a Toyota Sequoia, we find much more efficient packaging. So you'll notice that the roof is not as tall as the average full-size body-on-frame SUV, but we have an interior that is just about as spacious. And a vehicle that has up to 10.9 inches of ground clearance, yet it doesn't look huge, it doesn't look massive, and it's going to be a lot easier to park. That's all because this is a unibody SUV or crossover or whatever you want to call it. Moving to the rear, we find a subtle amount of chrome red turn signals, which is not my preference. It's worth noting that obviously overseas you'll get amber turn signals down there, a little bit of chrome down here, and real dual exhaust in every trim. They're well integrated into the bumper. Right here behind the middle section, we have an available tow hitch receiver. This is a 2-inch Class 4 receiver, and we have a 4-pin and a 7-pin wiring harness connection. The Grand Cherokee has long been a technology showcase for Stellantis. Stellantis is the conglomerate that now contains the former Chrysler group of companies, including Jeep. But the Grand Cherokee L takes things to the next level. Standard, we have radar adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection, lane departure warning, lane keeping assistance, rear parking sensors with rear autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, and rear cross traffic detection. All of that will be found on the base trim of the Grand Cherokee L. And I would expect that when we get the 2-row model, it'll be pretty similar over there. Available and on this particular model, we have the heads-up display, night vision. There's a little camera right over here inside this section of the grille, and a 360-degree camera system. Their cameras positioned all around the vehicle. Coming a little bit later, but not hardware on this exact vehicle, we'll have a Level 2 Plus semi-autonomous driving system. That's going to be substantially similar to Cadillac Super Cruise. It's going to be a hands-off-the-wheel driving system. If you want that on your Grand Cherokee L, you're going to have to wait till next year, because we know that the 2022 model year vehicles will not have the hardware to enable that system. But it has been announced, it is coming soon. Exact details are a little bit sketchy still. For North America, Jeep has only announced 2 engines so far, but you can bet that more engines are coming soon. These are essentially revised versions of what we find under the hood of the existing 2-row Grand Cherokee. The base engine is the one that I'm driving today. It's a 3.6-liter V6, produces 293 horsepower. If you want more power and a whole lot more torque, there's an available 5.7-liter Hemi V8 that bumps things up to 357 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission. The V6 will get you 21 miles per gallon combined, whether you choose rear-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. If you choose the V8 engine, you can't get that in rear-wheel drive. It's only 4-wheel drive, and fuel economy drops quite considerably, down to 17 mpg. Unlike the competition, Jeep has not just 1, not 2, but 3 different full-time 4-wheel drive systems. The base system is centered around a single-speed transfer case that will send power to the front axle when needed, and it will send the majority of the power to the rear axle for better fuel economy out on the open highway. That system can theoretically send 50% of engine power to the front axle even when there is no wheel slip out back, and if there is wheel slip on the rear differential, it could send nearly 100% of engine power to the front axle. We then have a 2-speed transfer case with a true neutral mode. So if you want to flat tow a vehicle, this is one of the few vehicles in North America you'll be able to with that 2-speed transfer case. That gives you a low ratio mode. There are also complete skid plates available from the factory on the Grand Cherokee L. And then the third package builds on that by giving you an e-locking rear differential. That's an electronically controlled locker. Thanks to the engine and transmission design in this Jeep, they've been essentially borrowed out of the Ram 1500. Towing ability is well beyond what we find in the average 3-row crossover, like a Highlander or a Pilot. The base engine gives you 6,200 pounds of towing ability, whether you choose rear-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. The optional V8 bumps that up to 7,200 pounds. The astute among you will notice, however, that that is well below the 8,700 pounds that you can tow in a Dodge Durango. That's because this is not related at all to the Durango. This is the all-new 3-row platform from Jeep. Why is the tow rating lower than the Durango? Well, there are 2 possible reasons, although Jeep has not commented directly. The rear suspension design of this is a little bit different than what we find in the current generation Durango. And remember, the Durango was originally designed to tow those higher weights in the high performance options with the 6.4 or the 6.2-liter supercharged engine. And that required some suspension changes and structural changes to the rear end of the Durango. That ended up bumping up the tow ability because the rear end was stronger. This may not have that kind of reinforcement in the rear. But it's also possible that they simply don't want to step on the toes of the upcoming Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer because those will tow up to 10,000 pounds. So logically, there's a lot of room in the Jeep lineup. It's possible that the 2-row version will tow a little bit less than this. Then we'll have the Grand Cherokee L, then we'll have the Wagoneer, and then the Grand Wagoneer in the lineup as well. Front seat comfort is excellent. The Grand Cherokee and now the Grand Cherokee L have always straddled the line between a mainstream vehicle and a premium or luxury vehicle, and we find seats that really cross that line as well. As you'd expect in a European luxury vehicle, we have power extending thigh cushions, inflatable side bolsters, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, 2-position seat memory for the driver and the front passenger, a memory-linked powered tilt telescopic steering column, and available front seat massage. Obviously, you won't find all of those features on a Toyota Highlander priced vehicle, but if you're looking at this versus something like a Lexus GX, honestly, this has more comfortable and more adjustable seats. Hopping into the second row, we find 111 inches of combined legroom. That's front row plus second row plus third row. That puts this right around where we find the Pilot and Highlander in terms of combined legroom, and a little bit below what we see in the Telluride and Palisade. This front seat's comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I have about 6 inches of legroom left. The second row seat slides forward and backward, and it also has a pretty decent recline to it. For second row seating, you have a choice between a 3-person bench seat or captain's chairs like I'm sitting in right now. These seats slide forward and backward, but it's worth noting that there is no 8-passenger version. It's just 6 or 7 passengers, depending on the trim that you get. The second row seats have a pretty decent recline to them. If I scoot this forward, you can see that right there. And they also have another nice trick up their sleeve. These will allow you to flip and fold this seat forward while a child seat is latched into place. And it will let you do that on both sides. This is one of the very few vehicles in North America that lets you do this. Obviously, this will only work if your child seat is latch anchored into place and all the weights are in the appropriate window, but it does mean that it's a lot easier to get in and out of the third row in this vehicle with a child seat in place here on either side than something like a Highlander, a Pilot, or Telluride or Palisade. In addition, the second row seats fold flat for improved cargo practicality. The handle on top is the one that tilts and slides those seats forward, so that way a child seat can remain into place. If I go ahead and close that door, pop that seat back into position, I have a ton of legroom back here. Now this second row seat is not all the way back in its tracks. Let me go ahead and slide that backwards for you so you can see. That is now back in its tracks. Don't have too much legroom back here. I have size 11 feet and they just barely fit right here tucked between myself and that seat, but I have about 3/4 of an inch of legroom left. If I put my head right back here against the headrest, I have about 1/2 inch of headroom left. So this is definitely more spacious than some of the smaller options out there when it comes to third row room. There are also a number of nice touches back here, like third row vents that are not in the ceiling. We have cup holders and USB ports for the third row and soft touch armrests back here. Another nice detail are one-touch buttons to power fold the third row seats right here by the door opening. So if you want to power fold or unfold those third row seats without going to the back, you have that option right there, so that way you can have those seats move into place. And they do move pretty quickly, as you can see. This model has 4-zone automatic climate control. You'll find the controls and some air vents right there in the center console, along with a ton of USB charge-only ports and a 115-volt inverter outlet. If we move over to the door, you'll notice another air vent right there in front of that rear door trim. Behind this power hatch, we find 17.2 cubic feet of storage space. This is pretty similar to the average mid-size 3-row crossover. As you can see, a 22-inch roller bag like this has no problem sitting in that position or even upright, and I can still close the hatch because this has a relatively vertical opening. However, you will find more cargo capacity in something like the Traverse or the Telluride, Palisade, and the Volkswagen Atlas, but this is a little bit more than we find in some of the smaller 3-row vehicles. Remember that even though the Grand Cherokee L is pretty big, about 205 inches long on the outside, a lot of the difference in terms of space is because of that big engine bay up front. Jeep continues to put the button for the power hatch over here on the left side of the cargo bay. That makes it easier to access if you're shorter or if you're a child. On the right side of the cargo area, we have buttons for the power folding third row seats, and a really nice touch is that they are a one-button press operation, so you don't have to hold on to it. We also have buttons to power fold the second row seats down, although the second row seats don't power fold back up. The third row seats, however, do, and again, this is a simple one-button press, so I simply press it there, and then those seats power fold up. Under the load floor, there's a bit of additional storage space. This is also where we find the jack for the vehicle. The spare tire is located entirely under the vehicle. We just pull this rubber plug out, and then you can actually lower the spare tire down. For our quick spin around the interior, I've hopped into a top trim Summit model that has the contrasting brown and charcoal interior. This one also has a large panoramic moonroof that extends to just over the second row passengers' heads. As with the previous generation Grand Cherokee, there's an imitation suede headliner, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. We have 4-way adjustable headrests. These are thinner and a little bit different than some of the headrests we've seen from Jeep before. These are a ratchet style design. As you'd expect from a premium vehicle, the front seats are definitely the most premium seat we've ever seen in a Jeep. These offer massage, adjustable side bolsters, and extending thigh cushion. And unlike a lot of vehicles in this segment, when we move around to the back of the seat, this is all soft touch stitched material right back here rather than a hard plastic back. There's also a little bit of a trim strip right there to dress things up a little bit. The seats are ventilated as well as heated, and you can see that there's a lot of stitching and quilting going on with this seat design. As you might expect in a vehicle that spans from around $36,000 to over $60,000, there are a ton of different interior color combinations, materials choices, etc. This particular model has a two-tone interior. The upper section of the dashboard is charcoal as well as a nearly black headliner, and then below that we have sort of a medium, I guess you might say somewhere between tan and chestnut color. There's also a gray interior and of course a charcoal interior as well. There's a ton of open pore wood trim going on in here. Really a nice touch, I have to say, with this interior that dresses things up and really makes this very comparable. This interior has a ton of open pore wood trim on it, not just on the front doors, but also if we go back there to the rear doors, you'll notice that the rear door construction is substantially similar to the front doors. There are also some well-integrated sunshades back there. Another nice touch is that in the top-end Summit trim, the entire lower section of the door is made from stitched materials. So the entire door has a really elegant appearance to it, and that continues as we move on over to the dashboard. Although you should know that if you get the Overland trim just one step below this, then we have more hard plastics going on. This section right here around the driver and passenger's knees, that becomes a hard plastic, as does the bottom of of the door. But in this top-end Summit trim, it is truly impressive as far as the build quality and just the materials used in here. There's a really elegantly stitched dashboard going on up here, more of that real wood trim. The glove compartment is a smallish bin-style compartment. Soft touch materials on the outside of there, but I was not able to fit a 10-inch iPad inside. Moving on over to the dashboard, we find the latest infotainment and navigation system. This is Uconnect 5, the same thing that we're seeing rolling across the entire Stellantis portfolio. This infotainment system is standard on the Grand Cherokee L, which is really a nice touch. You'll notice that Apple CarPlay or Android Auto does not use the entire screen. There are a bunch of different home screens. If you want to know more about Uconnect 5, I'll have a complete video on that. Interestingly enough, this is the same software version that we also find in the very lightly refreshed Dodge Durango. It got the brand new software. It's also the one that we're going to see in the upcoming Jeep Grand Wagoneer. Up top, we have 2 large air vents. Again, more dashboard stitching right there. Button to disable the auto start-stop system, lane keeping assistance, traction control, parking sensor enable disable. You cannot disable the front and rear parking system separately. And then we have a button to engage the autonomous parking system. Moving back down from there, again, we have that large LCD, a huge expanse of wood trim running across the dash, and a start-stop button right over there. The controls for the 3 or 4 zone automatic climate control system depending on the model that you get. There are also some infotainment controls in this button bank. So power and volume over here, tune knob over there, and then the controls for the heated seats, ventilated seats, heated steering wheel, all that sort of stuff. In addition to the physical buttons, some of the climate control settings are adjusted via the infotainment system. This is also where we find duplicate buttons for seat heating, ventilation, the rear controls, you can lock them to the driver, and you can adjust the front seat massage. This is the first Jeep to offer massaging seats. Moving back down the center console, we find a large storage area where we have a Qi wireless charging mat. Definitely enough room for some of those larger smartphones, even if a USB cable is connected. This system supports wireless CarPlay, but it does not force you to use it. You can connect via the USB port, and you can actually have things connected to both USB ports at the same time. There are 2 inputs, and they share the USB-C and regular USB ports. It's also a 12-volt power port there. We then have a metal shifter right here. It has a really nice knurled edge to it. It has a very premium feel. Drive, neutral, reverse, park, right like that. The controls for the adaptive height air suspension. This controls the multi-terrain select system, rock, sand, mud, snow, auto, sport, etc. In addition to the adaptive height suspension system, this vehicle also has an adaptive damping system, so if we put it in sport, things definitely firm up. There's a button for the 4 low if you get the 2-speed transfer case. Hill descent control right there, neutral if you want to flat tow your vehicle. 2 pretty large cup holders right here in the center console, and an all-new key for Jeep. That's a really nice touch. When they first handed me the key, I actually thought it was a Volvo key. It definitely has a premium feel to it. And then there's a lid to close off those cup holders. Between the front seats, we have a padded center armrest that opens to reveal a 2-stage storage area. There's one where you can keep cables, smartphones, that sort of thing, and then a slightly larger well below. On the driver's side, we have a full LCD instrument cluster. This has a variety of different views. You can get things like additional gauge readouts, some off-road screens right there, digital tachometer across the bottom, a bunch of different vehicle readouts, things like tire pressure, auto start, stop, fuel economy, some auxiliary gauges there. We also have navigation turn-by-turn directions and a full map display, which is really kind of cool. One of the things that I really like about this map display is it means you can have turn-by-turn navigation directions on the same sort of interface that you'd find over here on the infotainment system, while you're also using Apple CarPlay or Android Auto for things like traffic alerts. As you'd expect out of a modern Jeep, there are also some off-road information pages, some audio interface pages, vehicle messages, and you can click into here to change certain instrument cluster settings, and if you have the optional heads-up display, you could make changes there as well. The steering wheel is an all-new design. I wouldn't be surprised if we found this in other Jeep models and perhaps other Stellantis models in the future. There are paddle shifters on the back, and this still retains the track up-down and volume up-down buttons on the back of the steering wheel as well. Volume up-down on the right, track up-down on the left. There's a stitched leather airbag cover, real wood trim along the bottom of the steering wheel. We find the controls for the standard adaptive cruise control system over here on the right side. This driving button in the middle enables and disables the active driving assist system. This is what they call their aggressive lane centering system. And likely once we have the hands off the wheel system later in the Grand Cherokee and Grand Cherokee L, that may enable and disable the system, but they haven't been too specific. On this side of the steering wheel, we find controls for that multifunction large LCD instrument cluster, a button to change the views, and then a dedicated phone hang up and pick up button. Now to the nitty-gritty. How much will a Grand Cherokee L set you back? Well, the interesting thing about this model is that it really crosses between segments. So the base version is logically a direct competitor to the Highlander, the Explorer, the Pilot, etc. But the top-end versions could also be considered discount alternatives to a Land Rover or perhaps even a Range Rover. The base trim starts at $36,995 plus a relatively steep destination charge of $1,695. That price gets you the same V6 engine that's under this hood and an interior that is shockingly similar really to the top-end trims. The style is all very similar. Obviously, the parts are not quite as premium as this top-end Overland trim, but we still get the full LCD instrument cluster and the large infotainment system as well. You also get all the active safety technologies that I discussed earlier standard. The only things that are optional are the heads-up display, the night vision camera, the 360-degree camera as well. If you want the limited trim, which gives you the power liftgate, leather upholstery, etc., that's going to be $43,995. This Overland model, which is the trail-rated version, is $52,995. This has the full active air suspension system on it. The Summit trim starts at $56,995. There aren't too many options on that Summit trim, but it's important to note that if you want the V8 engine, that is pretty expensive. Likely due to corporate average fuel economy regulations in the United States, the 3.6-liter V6 is the standard engine in every trim, and the V8 is only available in Overland and Summit. So you have to pay at least the base price of the Overland trim that I'm driving right here, then you have to add four-wheel drive, then you add the V8 option, and that brings you up to $58,635. It's worth noting that that is about $10,000 more expensive than the base V8 in a Nissan Armada or a Toyota Sequoia. Let's be honest, the Grand Cherokee L has some really big shoes to fill. Currently, the two-row Grand Cherokee is the best-selling mid-size two-row crossover or SUV in the United States. Again, whatever you want to call the Grand Cherokee family. If Jeep combines the sales numbers, and I suspect they probably will, you'll probably find the Grand Cherokee at the top of the combined sales charts in the mid-size or large SUV or crossover segment. Again, it's a little bit tricky to classify the Grand Cherokee L because on the outside, it's 205 inches long just about, so 10 inches longer than a Highlander, but on the inside, it is almost exactly Highlander sized. It's also funky that this has a premium interior, more like what you'd expect out of an entry-level BMW or Mercedes, definitely classier than what we see in the average Toyota or Honda, especially the Honda Pilot, which is getting a little bit old right now. But you will pay for that because this model right here was nearly $60,000. So this is decently more expensive than Telluride or Palisade or some of the more expensive and newer entries in the mid-size three-row segment. I can't tell you how the Grand Cherokee L drives versus the Armada or Sequoia just yet, but I can help you connect some dots. Think about how the Dodge Durango or other unibody SUVs, especially luxury SUVs like the BMW X7 or the Mercedes-Benz GLS, think about how they compete against full-size body-on-frame vehicles like the Yukon or the Tahoe or the Sequoia, etc. And it's going to be substantially similar with the current generation Grand Cherokee, Durango, and this new Grand Cherokee. Because in terms of general design, the design of this Grand Cherokee is actually substantially similar to those luxury entries. Those are also unibody rear-wheel drive vehicles designed for big V8s under the hood. Obviously, there are pros and cons to any new vehicle design, and the one thing to keep in mind with the Grand Cherokee L is the vehicle's length. It's almost 205 inches long. A Highlander would end somewhere around here. So this is going to be a little bit easier to park in some tight garage situations, but on the other hand, this is not nearly as wide as something like a Chevy Tahoe or a Suburban. So this is going to be a lot easier to park in the average Suburban parking lot than those options, but definitely keep the length in mind. Be sure and hit that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos, including a complete review of the Grand Cherokee L just as soon as I can get this home and run it through my official testing for 0 to 60, 6 to 0 handling and all that jazz. Also, that's the video where I will compare this against the direct competitors in this segment, and probably a bit more of an expanded comparison section because there are so many different things that you could compare the Grand Cherokee L to. Not just something like the Toyota Sequoia or the Armada or a Highlander or a Pilot. This really crosses all sorts of barriers because this is about the same size on the outside and not too far off the size on the inside of something like an Audi Q8 or a BMW X7 or even a Mercedes-Benz GLS, which sounds a little bit weird when we're talking about a Jeep, but in an odd sort of way, this is actually more like the rear-wheel drive Land Rover or Mercedes or BMW competition than anything that you'll find from General Motors at the moment. The Ford Explorer gets a little bit close, but it is still not intended to be the same kind of thing that we see out of this Jeep. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there. Head over to facebook.com/AlexNautos. Check out my merch store at AOAmerch.com, Facebook, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.